Hello there. I'm Diane at PhotoFluent, and it's been a couple of weeks. I was on vacation visiting family on the East Coast. First, well, East-ish. North Carolina, yes, East Coast. But then we went to Michigan. A week in North Carolina, a week in Michigan, saw all the family, and it was so much fun. Sometimes you think being around your whole family for a whole week is a lot, but it was delightful. Yes, family, you were delightful. It was lovely. Nieces, a nephew, sisters, parents, we got to see everybody. And it really was lovely. But travel it wears you down a little bit. So I thought I'd jump right back in this week, be raring to go. And it's been a challenge. But here I am, live. And I thought, what should we talk about today? Well, here's a topic that comes up all the time, and it's a challenging one for a lot of folks. It's editing, photo editing. So that, my friends, is what we're going to talk about today. Let's jump in to photo editing. Hopefully you can see the screen well and it's not too crazy. When I share my screen, I can't go back and forth, or I can't look at the other one, or it does something funky. So I'll pop back in once in a while to see if there's any comments. But here we are. Let's talk about 4 simple editing tips to transform your photos, shall we? So why edit? I asked my private Facebook group, if you're not a member, why not? PhotoFluent travelers, come join us. Why do you edit, or why don't you edit? Well, why you edit, I think is obvious. You have some blah photos that just don't look like what you remember seeing. That was the #1 feedback I got. My photos don't look like I remember seeing. You remember this amazing scene. It was so cool. And yet, you get the photo back and it's not so cool. Well, editing can help you bring it up to what you remember seeing. And then if you shoot in RAW, they are completely unprocessed. They do need a little bit of help. And who doesn't want their photos to be the best they can possibly be? Now, why don't you edit? Some of what I've heard from people, you've tried before and it's just too freaking complicated, you can't figure it out. You get really frustrated or overwhelmed when you do. I'm talking to some of my students right now. We're in the middle of From Snapshots to Stories, the group mentorship program, and we're in the editing module. And some people are saying, oh my gosh, this is fun, and they're having a great time with it. And then other people are getting really frustrated. And I get that because I've been there, trust me. It's something you just have to push through and sometimes let go. You're not an expert yet. You got to start with the basics and just do one thing at a time. But anyway, I know it can be frustrating. Also, I hear from people that I know my photos need something, I'm just not sure what, and I don't even know where to start. And other people say, you know what, it just takes too much time. I get this too, because I used to take hours to edit, but you can do it quicker. I'll just leave it at that. Let's talk about why it's worth it to edit, shall we? And you know what that means, don't you? Before and after. I love before and afters. I always used to love it in the magazines back when I was a teenager for makeovers, the before and after. I just think it's a fun story. So here's a good before and after. It's that typical contrasty, super bright and shadows all in the same image. A little editing later, it still looks natural, but now you can see what's in the shadows. It just kind of brings out kind of highlights the good stuff, and you can bring down the not so good stuff. Even it out, give it some more wow. Make it look like you remember. Do I remember her being completely shadowed and not being able to see her face? No. but that's what my camera captured. But now I can see all the details. And the digital files now, especially if you shoot in RAW, there's so much information in those digital files that in the old days, if it was this dark, you could pull out some details, but it would be super grainy, not very clear. But look now what you can do. There's so much potential. Here's another before and after. Let's take another look at this one. I love gargoyles. The sky's blown out. There's super shadowed, not much detail. Now we have a pretty sky and the details all in one image. And this one on the left might have even been one you thought to throw away because it's not salvageable. The sky's blown out. You can't see any details of the Eiffel Tower, the underbelly. And yet, look at all that information in there waiting to come out. This on the right is what I remember seeing, but my camera captured what's on the left. Sure, you can improve that with camera settings. However, there are some situations like this one where the sky's really bright and there's other shadowed areas where all the camera settings in the world aren't going to take a great picture of it. So let's talk through 4 simple editing tips. The first one is to increase the contrast. Now I've talked about this one before. Contrast can be done in 4 different ways. Highlights, shadows, the contrast slider, whites and blacks, and the tone curve, or all of the above if you really like contrast. Don't worry, I'm going to show you these because it makes no sense in a bulleted list. The next one is to increase the clarity. So while you increase the contrast, you get the highs and the lows, but the clarity helps boost your midtones. So that's what I do with clarity. And then highlight or lighten your subject. Bring attention to your subject. So it's not just to make your photo look better, it's to give your viewer a better experience. It's not just about pretty pictures, it's about the story. How do you do that? You can use the radial filter or the adjustment brush, and I'll show you how to do that. And finally, the 4th tip, remove distractions. So think again about that path your viewer is going down. You want them to look at your subject and you want them to not land on and focus on the distractions. You can do that in 4 different ways. A clone tool, crop them out, desaturate distracting objects, or a vignette, or all of them. All right, let's see them in action. I'm going to pop over here and see if I have any comments. Not yet. Okay. Now, here we are in Lightroom. I want to start with this one. And what we have here is the lovely village of Annecy, France. And you can see it's one of those typical bright sky, got some shadows, people milling about. But what you don't know is 2 of those people are my relatives. This gentleman is my brother-in-law, Dave. Hello, Dave. And his son, Ben, my nephew. I want them to be the stars of this image. They are my subject. You wouldn't know it because they're not really emphasized. So let's go through our list. First of all, I want to add contrast. I like contrast, so I often do it in all of those ways. I take down the highlights is generally a good idea in most photos, up the shadows, and the whites give you brightness, and the darks just deepen, or the blacks just deepen the black area. So now you can see, before and after, I have more contrast. And I'm going to, see here's the contrast slider. On your right-hand panel in the basics, that's where I'm going here. I kind of jumped right in. Basics panel, all these different sliders are where you'll get your contrast. Highlights, shadows, whites, blacks. Up here is your contrast slider. and you can bring that back and forth as well. I sometimes use that and I sometimes don't because I do all of mine with in the other ways that I mentioned, like the tone curve, which is just below the basic panel. You can grab the tone curve and move it itself. I generally use the sliders and do a highlights. I'm careful because I just decrease the highlights. I don't want those too bright. But I'm going to bring up the lights a little bit, and I'm going to bring down the darks to get some more contrast. I'm going to adjust. Yeah, let's bring down the highlights even more. Okay, so now I have contrast. That's the first one on our 4 tips. What's the second one? Clarity. So now we've deepened the dark. We've brought down the highlights in the sky so we get some information back there, but we've also brightened the whites. So we have contrast. But now I want the midtones to come out, and that's where clarity comes in. All right, and that's as easy as the clarity slider. That's it. Now, the next way to really make your photos stunning is to emphasize your subject. And the way I do that, I mentioned the radio filter. That's this one at the top, just above the basic panel. You have this little panel, and that is a local adjustments section. Global adjustments adjust the whole photo. So when I adjust the whites, that adjusts the whites through the whole photo. It's a global adjustment. When I go to the local, then I can get specific as to where my adjustment's going. I'm going to show you the adjustment brush because it's my favorite. So you go up here and hover, and it says adjustment brush, and I click it, and now it's active. And what do I want to do with the adjustment brush? I get this little drop down over here. I'm going to lighten it. I'm also going to bring up the shadows of that specific area a little bit more. And so when you scroll up, your brush gets bigger. Scroll down, it gets smaller. And now it's like a paintbrush. So I'm going to go through and paint some of my darker areas that I want to brighten. I generally do several sweeps with my brush so that it doesn't look too obvious. Like if I really crank up the brightness, you can see it looks like there's a strip of bright. I want it to look natural. So I bring it just to where it starts to show and then pull it back down a little bit. And then I'll say that one's done. But I'm going to do the exact same thing with a different size brush. And what that does is it helps me have layers instead of too much. And I'll often brighten my specific subjects, but I will also brighten a path to them. That one's a little more obvious. And I will brighten around them because I don't just want them to glow, right? I want the viewer to land on them and feel like it was a very natural path. So I don't want them to just be glowing bright. I want this to be bright in front of them. And so now, instead of everything being dark, I have a beautiful lit path that brings your eye right to Dave and Ben. Okay, now let's talk about the 4th tip, and that is to remove distractions. The only distraction I see here really is this lady on the bike. She's a little bright because she's wearing white. So my eye really goes to her and looks at her as the subject. And you know, if I didn't know Dave and Ben, she might be my subject because she's a good one. But because I have these 2 people that I know and I want them to be the subject, I'm going to go back to my adjustment brush and I'm going to darken her. I think when I talked about the 4 ways to remove distractions, one was to clone them out. I'll show you that on another example. I said also you can crop them out, you can desaturate, and then there's another option, and that is to darken. And that's what I'm doing right here. So I just darken her enough that it's not too obvious. She just doesn't stand out as much as my subjects. This is very subtle. You might not even see the difference when I'm done, like, what was the point of that? It's very subtle, but those little brighten and darken different areas give your viewer a different experience and lead your eyes down a different path. And the other thing to remove distractions that I talked about is the vignette. So if you look at this photo, you still have this really bright sky. So a vignette will kind of pull the eye in. I always feather way up. It's subtle. It's another thing you don't really know is happening, but again, it just pulls your eye into the center, to your subject, and that makes our photo more complete. And there's the before and after. You cannot even tell that Dave and Ben are part of this photo really in the first one, and now it helps that Dave wears a red jacket. Thank you, Dave. It's very clear they are. All right, let's look at another. I'm going to pop back in just to see what's going on, if we have any comments, and go back to Lightroom. Let's look at another one. Okay, we have this little fella. I can't tell you how many photos of cats I have. I love cats. And in Venice, with these old, ancient buildings and a kitty just kind of hanging out, I don't know, it just screamed, take my photo. But you get it back, it's a little dull. This is one of those why edit photos points that I had, because they're blah, they're dull. It's not what I remembered seeing. Let's make it what I remembered seeing. So we're going to start with some contrast. And that means this one, the highlights look pretty good to me. I'm going to go whites up. It needs brightened. It's dull. Sometimes you think if it's dull, if it needs brightened, you go right to the exposure. But exposure is very heavy-handed. It really gets too bright too fast. The whites, on the other hand, just brighten the white areas. So that's where I start to brighten. If it's not bright enough, then I'll gradually increase my exposure. I'm going to do whites and blacks. I'm going to go down to the tone curve. I'm going to bring up my highlights, bring up my lights, bring down my darks, bring down my shadows. Pretty contrasty there. I do like contrast. I think that's a little much, even for me. So I'm going to dial it back a smidge. There. I'm going to leave it there. Now, what do we need? Clarity. I'm going to go midtones, come to me. Okay. And now, you still don't really look at the kitty. What's brightest? Where is your eye going? That's how to think about it. When you look at it, where does your eye go? My eye goes back here to this building, because it's pretty bright. Now it's pretty, I want it to be part of my image, but I think it's too bright back there. So I'm going to darken that area, and I'm going to do that with my brush, because I like that, and I'm going to pick the darken on the drop down, and I'm going to get a really big brush, and I'm just going to paint that darker back there. And now I can go over here and say, yeah, I'd like it even darker, because I still want people to see it. I just don't want their eyes to land there first and see it before they see my little friend. All right. Now oh, you know what else I forgot to do is bring up my shadows a smidge. Okay, so we want those shadows up. Now what do we want to do? Well, I find these little white splotches distracting. Your eyes go to what's brightest and what's in focus. And I feel like those are kind of bright and distracting. So remember I talked about that clone tool. This is the clone tool. In the local adjustments bar, you click the second one in, clone tool. And you can pick heal or clone. And I recommend just trying to see which one works the best. I almost always use the heel. That is what works best for me. But if it doesn't work, I'll try it again with clone and just see which one works best. So if you just click over it, Lightroom picks an area and says, hey, how about this? It has that stripe down it because there's a crack. I don't like that, so I'm just going to shift my selection over a little bit until that matches up. And sometimes it just works right away. And sometimes you have to just fiddle with it a little bit. And if I have to fiddle too much, I just right click and delete it. And I'm going to try it again. I'm going to make my circle a little smaller. Sometimes that helps. And we're just going to call that done. Now you could fiddle around with that because it doesn't exactly match up to the way I want it to look. I'm going to do another one over here. Sometimes it's like magic, like this one is going to be, and it just works and it disappears. I'm even going to take that black thing out because I don't like it either. Other times it doesn't quite work, but here's the thing I've also learned. Like this space, I would fiddle with and fiddle with, but the thing is, once you finish your edits, your eye doesn't really even go to that area. So before you fiddle too much, you know, let it go. And at the end, think, is it still bothering me? And if yes, then fix it. But once you fix everything else, it's just not something that anybody else will look at and see. I might have to fix that later. But now I want my kitty to be brighter. So I'm going to go over here to my adjustment brush and I'm going to lighten and I'm going to bring up the shadows. I'm going to make it biggish. And I'm going to go right around Kitty, but I'm also going to go along this whole area, and then I'll make it smaller and really highlight Kitty's face. Again, I don't want him to look like he's glowing. I don't want him to look unnatural. And you can see that the light isn't even here. He has light on the back, dark in the front, so I don't want to completely even it out. I just want to make him bright enough. That's too bright. So here's what I do, right? I grab another brush and do the same thing. I do multiple layers so that it just looks more natural. And then I might want to do one more. That one is pretty bright. So I'm going to undo that and do it again. Yeah. And then I'm going to grab one more and just do a more general one, but with a little less brightness. Barely any. So this one, I would take more time and it wouldn't be quite as obvious, but let's look at the before and after. So there is a line here where you can see my edits, and I would be more careful so I don't have that, because I don't want it to look like, wow, she clearly lightened that area. But what I want you to see is I don't just lighten my subject, I lighten around it because I want a path. So I want your eyes to go up to the kitty, look at the kitty, and then what? I want you to keep going back and see this amazing architecture around the kitty. So I want him to be a little brighter. I want the front maybe to be bright, and I want this to taper off. So I would take my time, and that's how I would use my adjustment brush in layers. So I do one brush, and then I do another brush, and I would lighten it so that I kind of have this brighter, a little less bright, a little less bright that leads my viewer through. Okay, now what's the last thing? I've eliminated distractions, I've added contrast and clarity, I've emphasized my subject. There's one more way to eliminate distractions. That's with my vignette. And this is the perfect place for one. You could put a pretty strong vignette in here. Add that feather, helps make it look more natural. And if it doesn't look natural, then I pull it back a little bit. But now you'll be able to see how much more obvious that kitty is than before. It gives a very different experience than the first one. On the left, my eye goes right back to the back wall. I'm distracted by these things on the pavement. where on the right, I really see the kitty. Okay, let's go back to, no, let's go back. Let's go back to here. All right, we saw it in action. Now, if this helped push you from the why I don't to the why I want to camp, and you need a little extra help, I'm hosting a photo editing interactive workshop in July. Yes, it is July, which means in a couple of weeks from now. Stay tuned. I'm going to announce next week all the details, and I'll do that both on YouTube if you're watching in YouTube and in our Facebook group. All right, if you want to watch the replay of this and some more videos, check out my YouTube channel, bephotofluent.com/YouTube, and don't forget to subscribe. Do you want to read a blog post about editing? That sounds fun. Go to bephotofluent.com/blog/edits-contrast. Yes, that's a lot, so I'll put the link in the post. Are you interested in joining a bunch of fun, creative travelers? Come on over to PhotoFluent Travelers and join us there. We're having a really fun July challenge, and I am truly impressed with all the photos I'm seeing there. I have some really talented members of this group. It's really fun to watch. And do not forget to check out my online classes. The prices are going up this weekend, so now's the time to enroll. PhotoFluentAcademy.com shows you all your options. There's one about composition, one for camera settings. Check them out. Any questions, let me know in the comments. And let's go back here. Wasn't that fun? Okay, I do love editing, so I do get excited about it. I didn't always love it though. I got frustrated and thought, I just don't understand this. I'm not good at it. All the same things I hear. Don't give up. Your photos that you throw away are, many of them, I should say, not all, many of them are salvageable, and it takes just a few quick edits to get them there. So don't give up. I hope this helped. Let me know in the comments what you learned, what you think about editing. You know, I like to hear it all. Have a great day and a great weekend, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.